Steph Pieri asks, have you ever tried putting SR4U laces on a laceless boot? I think that would be great. What's going on, guys? Josh from SoccerReviewsForYou.com bringing you another Q&A video, this time with the microphone not directly in the middle of the screen. You're welcome. All of the questions I'm going to be answering in today's video have been pulled from my Instagram, which is SR4U_Josh. So if you'd like to ask a question in the next Q&A video, if you're not following me on Instagram, make sure you go do that. Also, if you guys enjoy the Q&A series on this channel and want to see it continue on a weekly or bi-weekly basis, please support this one with a like. And if you don't want to miss out on future content from me, be sure to hit that subscribe button along with the little bell notification so you get notified when the next new video goes live. Vincent Bolin asks, which one is the best Mercurial ever made? I really like this question because obviously the Mercurial line has had a ton of different models over the years, and pretty much all of them have been pretty well received. There have been some flops, mainly those early Superflies for sure, but as a whole, I think the Mercurial really represents a constant evolution in developing a specific concept. So in terms of the best Mercurial ever, you could make the argument that it's the current Superfly and Vapor. Although, when you're talking about classic Mercurial, they're not really that classic. So for me, thinking about this question for about 5 minutes or so, there's two models that jump in my mind as the best ever. The first one being the Nike Mercurial Vapor 8, which I was personally a big fan of. I think it's really thin. I think it fits really well. I like the glass fiber sole plate. I like the stud pattern that it had with the two studs at the heel. Very aggressive. It really had that kind of sprinter spike type sensation, which I look for in a pair of Mercurials. But I don't think I could give that the title because for me, what I think about when I think classic Mercurial, and more so I think Mercurial Vapor rather than Superfly. I know the sock thing is popular right now, but that for me is not true Mercurial. The Nike Mercurial Vapor 10, I think, is probably the pinnacle of Mercurial Vapor for me. That fit me the best. I thought the upper was really nice. I liked the introduction of a one-piece construction. It fit great. I think it looked the part. It was super lightweight. It had everything that a Mercurial should be. And I guess you could make some of the same arguments for a Vapor 11 as well. But if you're asking my personal opinion, the best Mercurial Vapor ever, probably the Vapor 10. Laguti17 asks, why do you think so many players are making a switch to Puma? Because Puma is paying a lot of players to make the switch to Puma. Alex Sim asks, what was your worst experience with any soccer cleat? Given how many different boots that I've worn over the years, I've had plenty of great experiences, but also some pretty bad ones as well. And I think the one that really jumps out at me as being the worst is my experience with the original Nike Mercurial Vapor Superfly 1. And it was Vapor Superfly at that time, believe it or not. This is actually a story that I touched on a little bit in the Boot Nerds podcast that I do with J Mike from Unisport. So if you like this type of storytelling type stuff, go ahead and subscribe to the Boot Nerds channel. It'll be a little pop-up on screen. New episodes every single week. Either way, the Superfly 1, it came out. I was absolutely fascinated with this boot because at that time it was the first boot from Nike to feature Flywire technology. It had the carbon fiber sole plate. It had the hollowed out studs. It was the most high-tech football boot that the world had ever seen. And me being on a Mercurial kick at that point in time, I think everyone has their Mercurial phase as a kid, I really wanted them. The only issue was that they were very expensive. I want to say the retail price was about $350. So I saved up any money that I possibly could, and eventually I was able to get a pair of Superfly 1s. I had them in the banana yellow colorway with the black swoosh. I still remember them. I thought they were the coolest thing ever. So I ordered them online because they weren't available at my local store, and finally got them. When I put them on my feet, I immediately recognized to myself that these felt horrible, like super stiff plastic that just didn't feel right at all, but I didn't care. I just wanted Superfly 1s no matter what, and I ended up getting them in the middle of winter. And keep in mind that I live in Canada, so it's very cold and very frozen in the winter time. I got invited basically a week later to go train with an older team that would do one training a month during the winter time, just to kind of get the team together, because during the winter months you can't really do much training outside, but they were going to do it on whatever day it was. I can't remember, but I remember it was very snowy and it was very cold, like -12, -15 degrees. A temperature that you should not be outside playing in, especially wearing brand new Superfly ones for the first time. So I wore my new boots against my better judgment during this training session, and my feet were killing me the whole time. Cramps, blisters, you name it, I was going through it, but I didn't care. I just played through all the pain and it wasn't a big deal. I knew I was gonna have blisters, but it was the winter time, so if I didn't get to train for a couple of weeks, it wasn't that big of a deal. But when I got home and took the boots off, because I wasn't taking them off at the field, it was that cold, I took my socks off and then I saw my toenails, and both of my big toenails were black and blue, totally bruised. And that was my first experience with bruised toenails. And if you've never had a bruised toenail before, you know it's terrible. And I had it on both feet at the same time from a pair of Superflies in minus 15-degree weather. To go along with that, I also had blisters on the arch of both of my feet and on both of my heels. So needless to say, that was pretty much the last time that I ever wore the Superfly ones. I ended up selling them on eBay, recouping as much money as I could. I really wish that I hung on to them at this point, but that's definitely the worst experience with a pair of football boots I've ever had. Aaron NG20 asks, are you going to bring back the retro review series? For those that don't know, years ago I did a retro review series where I would take a boot that was no longer a current model, maybe it was 5 years old or older, and I would do a retro review. I'm not sure that I'm gonna bring that series back because I pretty much did retro reviews on all of my older stuff, but the 5 random boot series is kind of my way of bringing back that series in a slightly different way. If you guys haven't seen the videos on the channel, I did 2 videos in the last 2 weeks, and I pick up 5 random boots from my collection, and I basically give you an individual history lesson on all of them. I really enjoy making those videos. It takes me about 4 times as long to edit them just because there's a lot of information that I have to gather together and make sure that everything that I say is 100% right. But either way, if you're a fan of the old retro reviews, check out 5 random boots. I think you'll really like the videos. Tris Pulik asks, why did power boots lose their popularity? I think the simple answer to that question is that in general, modern football boots have really trended towards being thinner, lighter, and less bulky, which is more or less kind of the opposite way of how you would describe some of the flagship classic power boots that a lot of us remember and some of us miss. But I think to give a more complex answer to that question, it actually has a lot to do with where Adidas took the Predator line and where Nike was headed with the T90 Laser line. The Adidas Predator line is probably the most well-known power boot line of all time, but right around the release of the Adidas Predator X, the 10th ever Predator model, that's when I think Adidas deviated too far from that classic Predator formula. It replaced the Power Swerve, which still had that kind of classic Predator silhouette. They tried to do something very different with the Predator X, and as much as I personally like that boot, it's kind of an ugly boot, and it was not very well received. The sales reflective that, and that really, I think, killed the sales and made a lot of people move away from the Predator line altogether. In the case of Nike with the T90 Laser line, obviously the boots were very bulky. I think the T90 Laser 1, looking back, was probably the most sleek out of all the Laser models. T90 Laser 2, while it's one of my personal favorite boots of all time, it was very wide, it's very bulky. By today's standards, it's just not very good. The Laser 3 took that perhaps even further, and then the Laser 4, they tried to slim it down, but at that point in time, partially due to the fact that the Predator was also declining in popularity, people just didn't want power boots anymore, which is why they killed it off for the Hypervenom line that has recently been killed off again for the Phantom Venom, which is more or less a return of power boots, but in a way that is lighter, thinner, and less bulky in general. So that to me is the explanation why power boots kind of just went away. Joe Turner 11 asks, is the Nike Premier the best value for money leather boot on the market? If we're talking about the full retail price, a Nike Premier 2 is going to run you $110. It's a full kangaroo leather upper. It's not perfect by any means, but in terms of value for money, I think it's pretty tough to beat. I think if you're looking for the best performance characteristics along with kangaroo leather, something like a Nike Tiempo Legend 7 Pro, which retails for $130, is also a really solid option. And if you can find some Adidas Copa Mundials on sale, which retail for $150, that's not a bad option either. But for around $100, if we're talking about full retail prices, yeah, the Premier is tough to beat. JP Marquez asks, do you like how Adidas and Puma launch new boot generations every year, or do you like Nike's way of dealing boot generations every 2 or 3 years? I would say for the most part, I'm fairly indifferent in regards to the frequency of new boot releases. What I don't like seeing though is new boots for the sake of new boots. If the next generation product doesn't improve upon the previous one, then I don't think there's really a need for it to exist. And I think what we're seeing a lot of with Adidas and Puma right now, as they're releasing brand new boots every 9 months to a year, is that the new boot ends up being very similar to the old boot. We just saw a major refresh with the Future 19.1 versus the Future 2.1 as an example, but from Future 18.1 to 2.1, they're almost exactly the same. In the case of the Puma 1.1 versus the Puma 1.19.1, lots of ones in that sentence, they're almost exactly the same as well. And we've seen this from Adidas with the Predator 18 to Predator 19 generation. There really isn't much of a difference. So as long as the boots aren't getting worse with the next generation, I don't really have any problem with it. But in general, I kind of like what Nike does on that longer cycle. Is it as exciting? Probably not. I think people get hyped up about really new products in general rather than just colorway updates. But I think what Nike has always done really well is that when they do come out with something new, while they have had a couple of flops over the years, there's logical progression over the model that it replaces, and 95% of the time it ends up being a better product. That's not to say that Puma and Adidas don't do that as well, but I think when you try to put out more product more frequently, it's harder to kind of one up what you did before. Dylan Timoney asks, what are some reasons why you shouldn't wear soft ground boots on any other surface? Reason number one would be safety. If you have studs that are longer than they need to be, meaning that they can't fully dig into the ground, now you are elevating yourself, putting your ankles, your knees, your joints in general at a heightened risk of injury, which is obviously not what you want. Reason number two would be stud pressure. If the studs are too long and again are unable to dig into the surface, maybe not right away, but a couple weeks down the line after a bunch of use, you are going to feel those long metal studs digging into the bottom of your feet. Reason number three is durability. Those metal studs have screw-in points, and those screw-in points are actually more sensitive than you might expect. So again, if you're running around on a surface that's basically pounding those studs in those screw-in points, if they loosen a little bit and then you start running, which is inevitably going to happen on a ground that isn't soft, you could actually strip the screws and completely destroy the boots to the point where the studs no longer fit in there or stay in place, which means that they're no longer usable. Soft ground boots are made for soft ground and nothing else. It's that simple. Maurizio Chiara 99 asks, pizza or burgers? Definitely pizza. Evan Freer asks, do you think pre-game meals are important? Are there any you would recommend or not recommend? Nutrition in general, I think, is extremely important when you're talking about doing any kind of athletic activity. So when it comes to a pre-game meal, that is arguably the most important meal that you're going to have if you're trying to perform at optimal levels. When it comes to energy, when it comes to recovery, when it comes to building muscle, whatever you're trying to do, that all circles back to having the right diet. When it comes to a specific pre-game meal, I personally don't really have one. Rice and chicken is probably one of my go-tos, but I'm a little bit inconsistent when it comes to that kind of thing these days. I just know that there are certain things that I want to avoid eating before running around for any extended periods of time. I don't like feeling heavy. I don't like eating really heavy foods. I know that I have to avoid dairy if I'm going to be doing any kind of running because I will feel very bloated if that's the case. But I think the big thing about nutrition that a lot of people, I guess, get wrong is that there isn't one specific meal or one specific diet that's going to work well for everybody. You really have to try different things and see what your body responds to and how you feel eating those specific foods. And once you figure out what your body really likes and responds to, that's the thing that you should stick with. So in regards to diet and I guess pre-game meals, consistency is ideal, and really learning what you respond to is super important. Jeffrey Wiggles asks, what is your favorite celebration? To be honest with you guys, I'm not a big goal celebration guy. If I score a goal, I more or less kind of act like I've been there before. It's a fairly low profile celebration, maybe a fist pump at the very most, but for the most part, I'm not one of those guys that's going to run and do a backflip or have some kind of pre-planned dance with the rest of the team all incorporated into my celebration. That's just not my style, and it's not something that I'm really a big fan of, period, even at the professional level. Celebrate your goal. If you score a goal, that's great, but for me, big celebrations, not my thing. And that's it for this one, guys. If you enjoyed this Q&A video, please support it with a like. And if you have any questions regarding anything that I talked about in this video, as always, leave it down below in the comments, and I'll do my best to get an answer out to you as soon as I possibly can. If you'd like to ask a question in the next Q&A episode, again, my Instagram is SR4U_Josh. I'll make a post when I'm going to make a new Q&A asking you guys to ask questions, and I pull the best ones from that post. So go ahead and check that out if you haven't already. If you really enjoyed enjoyed this video and don't want to miss out on future content from me, be sure to hit that subscribe button along with the little bell notification so you get notified when the next new video goes live. All my social media information is also linked down below, so be sure to go ahead and check that out. And other than that, guys, thank you so much for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.